July 3rd, 1971, in a rented apartment on the Rue Beautreillis in Paris, a 27-year-old American is found dead in the bathtub. No autopsy is ever performed. He'd come to Paris to disappear, to trade the leather pants and the screaming crowds for notebooks and quiet mornings, to stop being a rock star and finally become a poet. Instead, within 2 years, the band that made him famous will be gone. By 1971, most fans already believed Jim Morrison was the Doors. The voice. The danger. The poetry set to a beat nobody else in rock was playing. But here's the part almost nobody knew then, and plenty still don't know now. The song that made him an icon, the one still playing on classic rock radio right now, he barely wrote a word of it. So if Jim Morrison didn't write the Doors' biggest hit, why, more than 50 years later, does his name still define the entire band? That's the story almost nobody tells right. If you're new here, this channel digs past what everyone already assumes to what actually happened. Hit subscribe before we get into it. Jim Morrison was born James Douglas Morrison on December 8, 1943, in Melbourne, Florida, the son of a career naval officer. The family moved constantly. Base to base, Morrison attended over a dozen schools before he finished high school, and never really put down roots anywhere. By his teens, he'd retreated into books instead of friendships. Nietzsche, Blake, Rimbaud, Kerouac. He was reading philosophy most adults never touch, alone, in one bedroom after another. His father, George Stephen Morrison, would later command a Navy carrier group involved in the Gulf of Tonkin incident in 1964, the episode that helped pull America into Vietnam. Father and son barely spoke after Jim left for college, and for years afterward, Morrison reportedly told interviewers, and even the band's own official biography, that both of his parents were dead. They weren't. It's one of the first signs of Morrison shaping his own legend long before anyone else got the chance to. By 1965, he'd graduated UCLA's film school with no real plan and no band. He was crashing on a friend's rooftop in Venice Beach, living on almost nothing, filling notebook after notebook with lyrics he never expected anyone to actually hear. Then, one afternoon on the boardwalk, he ran into a classmate, Ray Manzarek, a classically trained keyboard player who'd studied at the same film school. Morrison sang him a few lines from a song called Moonlight Drive. By Manzarek's own account, told years later, he knew instantly this could be a band, and, in his words, make $1 million. What almost never makes it into the story, the poet who would become one of rock's most electric frontmen was, at first, nothing like one. Early on, Morrison was so uncomfortable performing that he sometimes sang with his back to the crowd, staring at the wall behind the stage rather than the audience in front of it. The trained musician who'd recruited him, not Morrison, was, in these earliest days, the one running the show. That dynamic wouldn't last long. Through 1965 and 1966, the Doors, now rounded out by drummer John Densmore and guitarist Robbie Krieger, both recruited through a meditation class, worked the clubs of Los Angeles. First, the London Fog, a near-empty dive where they played to a handful of regulars most nights. Then the Whiskey A Go-Go, where the crowds grew and the sets stretched into 10 and 15-minute improvisations. It was on that stage, not in a studio, that early versions of The End and Light My Fire first took shape, night after night, refined in front of a live room instead of a producer. Elektra Records founder Jack Holzman caught one of those whiskey shows in 1966 and signed the band almost immediately. By then, the band already had its name, The Doors, borrowed from Aldous Huxley's The Doors of Perception, itself a nod to a line of William Blake's. Manzarek had played in other, forgotten lineups before. Morrison's arrival was what actually turned a working bar band into something with an identity worth naming. Morrison's confidence grew with every set, but the moment that actually cemented his standing inside the band had nothing to do with performance at all. Morrison proposed something unusual. Every song the band recorded, regardless of who actually wrote it, would be credited simply to the Doors. with royalties split evenly 4 ways. According to Krieger's own memoir, published decades later, Morrison pushed for this specifically because he didn't want to be seen as the band's sole songwriter, and he wanted the others to keep writing rather than defer to him. It's a detail that cuts against the image most fans have of Morrison as an ego-driven frontman, chasing the spotlight alone. By this account, at least, the opposite was closer to true. He built the structure that made the Doors a genuine collaboration, not a backing band assembled around one star. That structure would matter more than anyone realized, because what Morrison actually brought to the band wasn't chords or drum fills. The others handled that. It was something harder to credit on a record label: a voice, a set of words, and an identity no other band in Los Angeles had. The literary darkness of his lyrics, the Blake references, the Oedipal imagery, the sense that something ancient and violent was hiding underneath the music, became, more than any single riff, what made the Doors sound like nobody else on the Sunset Strip. In January 1967, the Doors released their debut album. Its first single, Break On Through to the Other Side, was pure Morrison, his manifesto, his call to overthrow the established order, as he put it in one contemporary interview. It also flopped, stalling at number 126 on the Billboard chart. Radio stations, uneasy with a line about a woman getting high, aired a censored version without the band's approval. Morrison sang it uncensored on stage anyway, every night, regardless of what the pressed single said. Critics were kinder to the album as a whole than radio had been to that single. Several early reviews singled out Morrison's lyrics specifically as unlike anything else being written in rock at the time. Then came the song that changed everything, and this is where the story gets complicated. Light My Fire hit number 1 in the summer of 1967. It's the song most fans would name first if asked what defines the Doors. And by Robbie Krieger's own account, confirmed in multiple later interviews, he wrote almost all of it. Reportedly his first attempt at songwriting, at Morrison's own suggestion that everyone in the band try. Krieger chose Fire as his theme, inspired loosely by the Rolling Stones' Play with Fire. Ray Manzarek added the Bach-influenced organ intro that opens the track. John Densmore shaped its Latin-tinged rhythm. Morrison's actual contribution was smaller than the myth suggests. A darker, more ominous second verse warning that the moment to hesitate had already passed. And the song's most remembered closing plea, urging the night itself to ignite. Wenham Radio cut the extended instrumental solo for the single release. The full band pushed back. Manzarek later called it proof that mainstream radio simply didn't understand what they were doing musically. The full, unedited album version ran nearly 7 minutes, decades later. It's that longer cut, not the shortened single, that classic rock stations play almost exclusively today. So why does a song mostly written by Robbie Krieger still read in the public imagination as a Jim Morrison song? Because Morrison sang it. Because it was his voice, his stage presence, his mystique that fans were actually responding to. The song was the vehicle, but he was what people remembered walking out of the theater. That same debut album closed with The End, an 11-minute Oedipal fever dream Morrison had been developing live at the Whiskey. One so unsettling that an improvised line about killing his father got the band fired from the club in August 1966, before they'd even signed with Elektra. A persistent studio legend claims Morrison, high on acid, set a television on fire during the recording session. The session's own engineer has flatly denied it. It did not explode. None of that happened. What's verified is simpler and just as telling. The label's founder-backed producer Paul Rothchild, and Morrison's insistence that the track run uncut, at a length no label executive would normally allow on a debut record. Around the same time, a photographer for the label shot the Young Lion session, the leather-clad, bare-chested images that became the album's visual signature, and, later, one of the most reproduced rock photographs of the decade. Not the whole band's images. Morrison's. From the very first record, Elektra was selling one face. By late 1967, the same qualities that had made Jim Morrison magnetic on stage were beginning to make him unpredictable everywhere else. On The Ed Sullivan Show that September, producers asked the band to change a line in Light My Fire that seemed to reference getting high, worried it would draw complaints. The band agreed backstage. Morrison sang the original line anyway, live, in front of millions. The band was banned from ever appearing again. The popular version of this story paints it as calculated rebellion. Krieger's memoir tells it differently. The band, he says, genuinely believed Sullivan's people were joking about the request, and Morrison simply forgot, the way he sometimes did before a show. By December, in New Haven, Connecticut, Morrison was maced by a police officer backstage before a show. Rather than let it go, he described the incident to the crowd mid-performance and was arrested on stage, mid-song, becoming, by most accounts, the first rock star ever taken into police custody in the middle of a concert. Police cited profanity in how he described the backstage incident to the crowd. The set was cut short mid-song, and the resulting headlines, "A rock star hauled off stage in handcuffs," did more to cement his outlaw image than any planned stunt could have. Ray Manzarek later described two versions of his bandmate: the poet-shaman audiences fell in love with, and what Manzarek called Jimbo, the drunk, difficult version alcohol could summon, without warning, someone the rest of the band had learned to watch for. That's Manzarek's own framing, not an objective diagnosis, but it captures something the band was genuinely living with on a near-nightly basis by this point. Then, in 1968, Buick offered $75,000 to use Light My Fire in a car commercial. Come on, Buick, light my fire. According to Densmore, Morrison was so furious when he heard about it that he called the company directly and threatened to smash a Buick with a sledgehammer on live television if the ad ever aired. It never did. Morrison had protected the band's integrity, but Densmore later pointed to this exact moment as the first real crack in the group's unity. The point where All for One stopped feeling automatic and started feeling like something that had to be fought for. This is the mechanism worth sitting with. The same persona that made Jim Morrison the reason people believed the Doors were dangerous was also the reason he was becoming almost impossible to plan around, and the discipline that had built the band in the first place was starting to buckle under the weight of his own myth. By early 1969, on paper, the Doors were as successful as they had ever been. Gold records, sold-out arenas, no visible hint yet of the collapse to come. On March 1st, 1969, the Doors played Dinner Key Auditorium in Miami, a venue built for roughly 6,000 people that the promoter had oversold to more than 10,000. Packed into a hangar with almost no air conditioning in the Florida heat. Morrison arrived drunk and late, and the crowd had already been waiting for hours. By some accounts, he told the audience from the stage that he wasn't talking about no revolution, just urging them to enjoy themselves. A comment prosecutors would later characterize very differently in court. What happened next has never been settled. Morrison was accused of indecent exposure on stage. To this day, whether it actually occurred is disputed. None of the roughly 500 photographs entered as evidence at trial clearly showed it, and all three surviving bandmates have denied it happened. What isn't disputed is the fallout. An arrest warrant issued days later, more than 20 canceled shows across the country, and a touring career that never fully recovered. Miami's mayor publicly called for Morrison's arrest within days, and several other cities pulled permits for already booked Doors shows before the band had any real chance to respond. Promoters, spooked, simply stopped booking the band. As manager Bill Siddons put it afterward, it ruined their career. It ruined Jim's life. The trial ran through August and September of 1970, 40 days in a Miami courtroom. Morrison was convicted of indecent exposure and open profanity, acquitted of the more serious felony charge, and sentenced to 6 months in jail with hard labor, a sentence he never served, freed on appeal before his death. In 2010, nearly 40 years later, Florida's clemency board voted unanimously to pardon him. Governor Charlie Crist put it plainly, the guilt or innocence is in God's hands, not ours. The creative toll showed up almost immediately. On 1969's The Soft Parade, a disengaged Morrison let Krieger write half the album, the first Doors record credited to individual writers instead of the whole band, a direct reversal of the very structure Morrison himself had built 2 years earlier. But the band wasn't finished. On Morrison Hotel in 1970 and LA Woman in 1971, a re-engaged Morrison helped steer the Doors back toward the raw blues that had drawn them together in the first place, proof that when he actually showed up, the songwriting core still worked as well as it ever had. In March 1971, after finishing his vocals for LA Woman, Morrison left for Paris with his longtime partner, Pamela Courson. He wanted out of the Miami sentence hanging over him, out of the rock star costume, out of a life that had stopped feeling like his own. He grew a beard, put on weight, and spent his days walking the city and writing poetry, much of it never published in his lifetime. He'd already self-financed 2 small poetry collections, The Lords and the New Creatures, in 1969, and was reportedly working on a third. Friends who saw him that spring described someone trying, deliberately, to disappear, skipping interviews, avoiding photographers, walking for hours through neighborhoods where nobody knew his name. On July 3rd, he was found dead in that apartment. He was 27. Under French law at the time, no autopsy was required, and none was performed. The death certificate listed heart failure. Only Courson and a family friend, Alain Ronay, saw the body before burial 4 days later at Pré-Lachaise Cemetery. Because there was no autopsy and no toxicology report, the true cause of death can't be established with certainty, and it likely never will be. The most widely accepted account, based on Courson's own later statements and corroborated in substance by Ronay, points to an accidental heroin overdose. Other, more sensational claims have surfaced over the decades. A different location, a different circumstance, but they emerge 30 or 40 years after the fact, contradict each other, and remain unconfirmed. The rumor that Morrison faked his death entirely has been flatly rejected by Krieger, Densmore, and Siddons, who has said simply, "I buried the man." The 3 surviving members chose to carry on as a trio, splitting lead vocals between Manzarek and Krieger, and released Other Voices later that year and Full Circle in 1972. Both were competently made and commercially forgettable. Neither cracked the top 30, and touring slowed to almost nothing. By August 1973, the Doors had disbanded. The musicianship had never been the problem. It just turned out the band's music, without Jim Morrison singing it, wasn't quite what people had actually been listening for. In 1978, the surviving members released An American Prayer, setting Morrison's own recorded poetry readings to new music, a strange posthumous coda that outsold both post-Morrison studio albums combined. The man who had fled to Paris that spring, hoping to disappear into anonymity, would, within a few short years, become the one thing he could never again escape: everyone's memory of him. Today, at Père-Lachaise Cemetery in Paris, Jim Morrison's grave is still marked most days by fresh flowers left by strangers who weren't alive when he was performing. Visitors drawn to a reputation that has, in some ways, grown bigger than the man himself ever was. In 1980, the biography No One Here Gets Out Alive turned Morrison into rock's definitive martyr poet and sold millions of copies doing it. Producer Paul Rothchild, who'd worked with Morrison in the studio, later called it a great piece of sensationalism, very little of which holds to historical fact. Oliver Stone's 1991 film cemented the same larger-than-life image for a new generation, an image both Krieger and Manzarek publicly said got the details wrong, even as it made Morrison more famous than he'd ever been while alive. The portrait never really stopped growing. In 1993, the Doors entered the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Morrison is still routinely ranked among rock's greatest frontmen by outlets from Rolling Stone to NME. Musicians from Iggy Pop to Eddie Vedder have named him a direct influence. Rolling Stone would later rank him among the greatest singers in rock history, an assessment that would have seemed impossible to predict from the shy performer who once sang with his back to the crowd. Even the fight over his legacy never fully ended. John Densmore spent years in court battling to stop the other surviving members from touring under the Doors name without him, arguing the band's identity wasn't theirs to license out piecemeal. Surviving members disagreeing in public over who gets to use Jim Morrison's legacy and how that, in its own way, proves the point better than any biography could. The Doors could survive without Jim Morrison's guitar, his organ, or his drums. He never played any of them. What they couldn't survive without was the poet who turned 3 skilled musicians and himself into a legend, and then, in the end, became a casualty of the very myth he'd created. That's why, more than 50 years later, when people say The Doors, what they actually mean is Jim Morrison. If this kind of story, the real one behind the image, is what you come here for, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.